History is not only the cities that still stand in stone, it is also the memory of those long forgotten. Empires rose and fell, their names swallowed by the dust of time. Yet their traces remain. Among the mountains of Anatolia, where the sky meets the earth, once stood a kingdom equal to Egypt and Babylon, a state that learned to rule the stormland, to make peace through the power of words. They were called the Hittites, a people who wrote the first peace treaty, who built cities of stone, and then vanished as if they had never existed. And today, we will explore who the Hittites were, how they lived, how they ruled, and why their empire, once the strongest in the world, disappeared into the silence of the Bronze Age. The Hittites, the forgotten empire of the Bronze Age. The land of Hatty, birth of a nation. In the heart of ancient Anatolia, among rocky hills and dry valleys, there once existed a land whose name was lost to memory. Today, these territories belong to Turkey, but 4,000 years ago, they were home to a powerful civilization, the Hittites. For centuries, humanity knew nothing about them. Only in the late 19th century did archaeologists, excavating near the town of Bogaskoy, uncover thousands of clay tablets covered in cuneiform script. The language was unlike any other, neither Akkadian, nor Sumerian, nor Egyptian. It remained a mystery until scholars realized that the tablets belonged to an entirely forgotten people, and that their tongue was the oldest known member of the Indo-European family. Thus, the Hittites were reborn from oblivion. Their land, called Hatty, lay at the crossroads of worlds. To the east stood Assyria and Babylon, to the south, Egypt, and to the west, the rising civilization of the Aegean. It was a meeting point of cultures, gods, and trade routes, a place where war and diplomacy coexisted. Long before the Hittites, these hills were home to the Haitians, indigenous tribes who worshipped mountain spirits, the sun, and the storm. Then, around the year 2000 BCE, Indo-European peoples arrived from the north. They brought with them new rituals, new gods, and new ideas of rule. Blending with the local inhabitants, they forged a unique culture, part Eastern, part European, the civilization of the Hittites. The first known ruler was Labarna, who united scattered city-states under one authority and laid the foundation for the Hittite realm. His successor, Hattusili I, moved the capital to Hattusa, a fortress city rising among the rocks, protected by massive stone walls and lion-shaped gates. It became the symbol of a new power emerging from the Anatolian mountains. The Hittites quickly became both warriors and builders. They adopted cuneiform writing from Mesopotamia, recording chronicles, treaties, prayers, and laws. Their archives speak not only of battles, but also of everyday life, disputes between neighbors, contracts between kings, and oaths sworn before the gods. Their laws reveal a surprising sense of balance. Unlike the Babylonian code, The Hittite law rarely demanded death. Crimes were compensated with cattle, grain, or labor. Justice meant restoration, not vengeance. For the Bronze Age, this was a remarkably humane idea. The Hittites did not see their kings as gods. To them, the ruler was the great king, the intermediary between humans and the divine, but not divine himself. This belief set them apart from the Egyptians and reflected their rational, structured worldview. Their religion was a vast tapestry of local and borrowed deities. The Hittite pantheon counted hundreds of gods for each city, river, and mountain. The most revered were the storm god Teshub and his consort, the sun goddess of Arena. They embodied the forces of nature on which the lives of farmers depended. Over time, the Hittites mastered the art of diplomacy. They signed written treaties with neighboring kingdoms, exchanged royal daughters, and sent envoys across the Near East. Their bureaucracy became one of the most advanced of the ancient world, yet their rise was turbulent. The early kings faced rebellions and conspiracies. One of them, Mursili I, marched his army all the way to Babylon and conquered it, only to be assassinated soon after by his own relatives. The story of the Hittites is filled with such betrayals and tragic power struggles. Despite the turmoil, the kingdom survived. It emerged stronger, transforming into a major power of the Bronze Age, a state that could stand alongside Egypt and Babylon as an equal. Thus was born the Hittite Empire, the first great Indo-European power in history, leaving behind thousands of clay records, temples, fortresses, and the echo of a people who believed that the world stood upon words and oaths. Their name vanished for 3 millennia, but their words, pressed into clay, endured. And through them, the Hittites still speak, a people who once held both the sword and the stylus, whose story is only beginning. Empire under the sign of the storm. The Hittites entered history as a people whose destiny was bound to the power of the storm. Their chief god Teshub, the sky and thunder, he held lightning in his hand and stood upon a bull, a symbol of strength and courage. The Hittites, thunder was not merely a natural sound, it was the voice of the gods, a reminder that the order of the world depended on divine will. Everything in Hittite life revolved around balance between heaven and earth. They believed that if a man broke an oath or violated a treaty, the wrath of Teshub would fall not only upon him, but upon the entire nation. That is why, in Hittite society, the concept of the treaty was sacred. Wars ended not only with peace, but with solemn oaths, sealed by words, by clay, and by the names of the gods themselves. From these beliefs grew an empire. Under King Suppiluliuma I, the Hittites reached the height of their power. He was not only a warrior, but a strategist, a diplomat, and a ruler who understood politics better than most kings of his age. During his reign, the Hittite Empire stretched from Syria to the Aegean Sea. Suppiluliuma defeated Mitanni, one of the great powers of the East, subdued Syria, and took control of the trade routes that carried copper, silver, and the rarest of metals, iron. Egyptian chronicles tell us that even Pharaoh Akhenaten began to hear of a rising power in the north that challenged his influence. After Akhenaten's death, chaos reigned in Egypt. Young widow of Pharaoh Tutankhamun sent a desperate letter to Suppiluliuma asking him to send one of his sons to become her husband and king of Egypt. It was an unprecedented request. An Egyptian queen asking a foreign prince to take the throne of the pharaohs. But fate intervened. The messenger was killed, and the prince never reached Egypt. The plan failed, leaving behind only a trace of how deeply the destinies of these two great powers had become entwined. At that time, the Hittite army was one of the strongest in the Near East. Its core was the chariot, light, fast, and deadly. Each was manned by two warriors, moving with precision across mountains and plains. The Hittites were masters of metal. Their smiths forged bronze, and may have been among the first to work with iron. Their soldiers carried short swords, wore horned helmets, and leather armor reinforced with bronze plates. But their greatest weapon was discipline. Each man knew his place, and even in the chaos of battle, their army moved like a single mechanism. Yet victory often carried a heavy price. After one of the Syrian campaigns, a devastating epidemic swept through the land, taking thousands of lives. King Suppiluliuma himself died, struck down not by the sword, but by the unseen hand of disease. With his death, a new era began, an age of storms and great battles. His successors inherited a vast empire and immense responsibility. Kings Mursili II and Muwatalli II now faced the rising power of Egypt. Both empires sought control of Syria, the strategic land that linked east and west. The climax came at the Battle of Kadesh, one of the most famous battles in ancient history. On one side stood the Egyptian pharaoh Ramses II. On the other, the Hittite king Muwatalli II. Tens of thousands of soldiers met on the banks of the Orontes River. The sun burned overhead, dust filled the air, and the rumble of chariots echoed like thunder. Neither side achieved a decisive victory. The Egyptians claimed triumph in their inscriptions, yet the Hittite tablets tell another story of exhaustion, of loss, and of the futility of endless war. In the end, both nations chose wisdom over pride. A few years later, they signed the world's first written peace treaty. The clay tablets preserved its words. Egypt and Hatty shall be friends, and their peoples brothers. If an enemy attacks one, the other shall come to his aid. It was the dawn of diplomacy, the first recorded international alliance built not on fear but on trust. That treaty would become a model for generations to come. After Kadesh, the Hittite Empire enjoyed a brief period of peace. Its influence extended across Anatolia and Syria. It controlled trade, collected tribute, and strengthened its temples. But beneath the calm, dark clouds were gathering. The Bronze Age world was nearing its twilight. Trade routes began to collapse. Cities fell to raiders, and mysterious sea peoples appeared, a storm that would soon consume entire civilizations. For now, however, the Hittite Empire still stood tall. Under the sign of the lightning and the god of storms, it reached the peak of its glory, unaware that the greatest storm of all was still to come. the Battle of Kadesh, and the first peace treaty in history. At the dawn of the 13th century BCE, the world of the Bronze Age stood on the edge of great change. Two mighty powers, Egypt and the Hittite Empire, competed for control over Syria. This land was more than a strip of territory. It was the crossroads of the ancient world, where trade routes linked the East and the Mediterranean. Whoever held Syria held the arteries of gold and power. The Hittites were ruled by Muwatalli II, son of the great Suppiluliuma. He had inherited a vast and powerful state, but also a heavy burden to keep his restless vassals loyal, many of whom looked toward Egypt for alliance. In Egypt, a young and ambitious pharaoh, Ramses II, reigned proud, charismatic, and determined to expand his glory. Both rulers sought to prove who was the true Lord of the world. In 1274 BCE, their armies marched to meet each other. The Egyptian army consisted of 4 divisions: Ra, Amun, Ptah, and Set. The Hittite forces were drawn from vassal kingdoms, with charioteers and infantry from northern Syria and Anatolia. The battlefield was chosen near the city of Kadesh, on the banks of the Orontes River, the heart of the disputed land. Ramses II, confident in his scouts, advanced recklessly, unaware that a trap awaited him. The Hittites had already taken positions behind the hills, hiding thousands of chariots. When the Egyptians, stretched thin and unprepared, set up camp, a storm of arrows and wheels erupted upon them. The chariots of Muwatalli thundered down, crushing tents and men beneath their hooves. Panic spread through the Egyptian ranks. Many fled. Others fell where they stood. The battle seemed lost until Ramses rallied his personal guard. According to Egyptian inscriptions, the pharaoh fought like a god, standing alone against the tide, driving the Hittites back. But the Hittite tablets tell a different story, one of confusion, chaos, and exhaustion, where no side truly triumphed. The Hittites held their ground, but could not destroy the Egyptians. The Egyptians survived, but failed to take Kadesh. The day ended in smoke, blood, and silence. Both kings proclaimed victory. Ramses returned to Egypt as a hero, ordering the scenes of battle to be carved on temple walls. Himself towering above enemies, chariot racing through fire and dust. Muwatalli celebrated his own success. He had held Syria, kept his vassals, and retained his pride. Yet behind the proclamations, both empires were weary. Years of war had drained their treasuries and broken their armies. To the east, a new power was rising, Assyria, and neither Egypt nor Hatty could afford another endless conflict. More than a decade later, Muwatalli's successor, King Hattusa III, chose a different path. He sent envoys to Egypt with an offer of peace. By then, Ramses II was older and wiser. He understood that peace was the only way to preserve the balance of the ancient world. Diplomatic letters passed between the courts, a careful, deliberate exchange that would lead to something entirely new. In 1259 BCE, Egypt and the Hittite Empire signed the first known written peace treaty in human history. It was engraved on silver tablets and copied onto clay. Versions of the text have survived in both Egyptian hieroglyphs and Hittite cuneiform. It declared, "Good peace and good brotherhood shall exist between the great king of Egypt, Ramses, and the great king of Hatty, Hattusa. They shall be allies forever, helping one another against any enemy. If anyone attacks one, the other shall come to his aid. This oath is sworn before the gods of the sun and the storm, and may the one who breaks it be cursed." This was more than a treaty. It was a milestone of civilization. The first time peace between nations was secured not by conquest, but by words. Peace between Egypt and Hatty lasted for decades. Hattusili's daughter was given in marriage to Ramses II, and in Egypt she was known as Ma-Thorn-Ferur. Hittite princesses lived at the pharaoh's court, and trade between the two empires flourished once more. But beneath the harmony lay exhaustion. The peace was not born from strength, but from the weariness of two aging empires. To the east, Assyria rose like a storm. To the west, rebellious tribes stirred. And across the sea, mysterious sea peoples were beginning to move. A wave that would soon wash away the civilizations of the Bronze Age. The age of Hatty was nearing its end. But before their capital, Hattusa, fell silent beneath the dust of centuries, the Hittites left humanity a gift. The knowledge that even the mightiest enemies can speak, not only fight. A gift that outlived their empire and still endures today. Everyday life in the heart of Anatolia. Empires are often remembered for their wars and their kings, but the true face of a civilization is revealed in its everyday life, in the rhythm of work, family, and faith. So it was with the Hittites. Behind their stone walls, clay tablets, and bronze swords lay a world astonishingly familiar, filled with homes, families, beliefs, fears, and quiet hopes. The capital of the Hittite kingdom was Hattusa, a city carved out of rock, surrounded by mighty walls that stretched for 7 kilometers. They climbed the hills like a serpent of stone, with gates guarded by lions and human-faced gods. Through the Lion Gate, the King's Gate, and the Sphinx Gate, passed envoys, merchants, and soldiers, bringing news and goods from every corner of the empire. Hattusa was not only a political center, but also a sacred one. At its heart stood the great temple, dedicated to the storm god Teshub and the sun goddess of Arena. There, incense rose into the air, offerings were made, and the king himself served as high priest. For the Hittites, religion was inseparable from power. The king was accountable not only to his people, but also to the gods, and every agreement, even a trade contract, was sealed in their names. Their pantheon was vast and intricate. They called their land the country of 1,000 gods. Each city had its own protectors, each river and mountain its spirit. Beside Teshub and Arena were the god of the underworld Alawana, the goddess of fertility Hanahana, and many deities adopted from neighbors, the Hurrians, the Syrians, the Babylonians. Hittite religion was a living mosaic, absorbing everything around it, just as Anatolia itself stood between East and West. Their myths echo through later civilizations. In one tale, the storm god battles a great serpent who has stolen the rains. In another, the goddess Inara tricks a monster into drunken sleep with wine. These were not mere stories. They were explanations of the universe, of storms and harvests, of chaos subdued by order. Life for ordinary Hittites was hard yet stable. Agriculture was the heart of their world. They grew wheat and barley, tended vineyards, and raised sheep, goats, and cattle. Their iron plows and bronze sickles made them more productive than many of their neighbors. Each household stored grain in clay silos, preparing for the cold winters of central Anatolia. Their houses were built of stone and clay, with inner courtyards and flat roofs. Inside stood clay jars, wooden spoons, bronze knives, and pottery bowls. In wealthier homes, archaeologists have found jewelry made of gold and lapis lazuli brought from distant lands. Clothing was woven from linen and wool. Men wore short tunics, women long dresses, often embroidered or wrapped with headscarves. Women held a special place in Hittite society. Unlike in many ancient cultures, they could own property, sign contracts, and even represent their families in court. Queens played an important role in politics. They took part in rituals, accompanied their husbands on diplomatic missions, and could rule in their absence. One queen, Puruhepa, became a symbol of wisdom and power. She corresponded personally with Pharaoh Ramses II and helped draft the Great Peace Treaty between Egypt and Hatty. The Hittite legal system was advanced and pragmatic. Judges heard cases of debt, theft, land disputes, and inheritance. Punishments were often monetary rather than lethal. Justice aimed to restore balance, not revenge. The Hittites understood that order must rest not on fear, but on responsibility. Thousands of documents discovered in Hattusa preserve their world in remarkable detail. Decrees, letters, prayers, and even private notes. Through them, we can still hear their voices. One official writing to his wife, "Do not worry, I live. The god Teshub protects me." Another pleading, "Send flour. We have no bread left." Such words erase the distance of millennia. They remind us that ancient people worried, worked, and loved just as we do. The Hittites valued knowledge deeply. They trained scribes, maintained archives, and built palace libraries. For them, the written word was sacred, a bridge between humans and gods, between the present and eternity. Yet beneath the surface of order lay unease. Rebellions flared on the borders, harvests grew thin, and the climate began to shift. The same winds that once carried prosperity now whispered of decline. The Hittites still built temples and signed treaties, but the shadows of a new age were already approaching. They did not know they were living in the final century of their greatness, that their cities would burn, and the names of their gods would fade into dust. But for as long as the sun rose over Anatolia, the prayers of Hattusa filled the air. and thousands of people still believed that the world would stand, as long as the gods were listening. The decline and disappearance of the empire. No civilization is eternal. Even the mightiest powers fall, not from a single blow, but from slow exhaustion that eats away at their foundations. So it was with the Hittite Empire, once ruler of the mountains of Anatolia and the fertile valleys of Syria. After the glorious reigns of Suppiluliuma and Muwatalli came new kings, Mursili III, then Hattusili III, and Tudhaliya the First V. They inherited a land weary of war and plague, yet still proud and strong. The Hittites maintained diplomacy with Egypt, traded with Assyria, repaired temples, and built roads. On the surface, the empire still seemed stable, but beneath that surface, fatigue was spreading. The empire had grown too vast, too complex to govern. Faraway vassals in Syria, on the western coasts, in the mountains of Armenia, grew restless and defiant. The treasury drained, harvests failed, and trade slowed. The sky to which the Hittites had prayed for centuries now seemed silent. The climate was changing. Drought followed drought. Rivers shrank. Fields turned to dust. Villages emptied as people moved toward the sea in search of food. The once mighty army could no longer feed itself. And from every direction came new enemies, the Assyrians from the east, the Phrygians from the west, and mysterious invaders from across the sea peoples. They came from the shores of the Aegean and the Mediterranean, not one nation, but a storm of tribes. They had no king, yet they moved like a tide, burning cities, plundering temples, destroying ports. They brought with them the end of an age. With their advance fell Mycenae, Cyprus, Ugarit, and many kingdoms of Syria. The Hittite Empire would be among their final victims. The last years of Hatty are shrouded in darkness. Hattusa, the once great capital, slowly emptied. The archives speak of famine, broken supply lines, and migrations of people. Letters from the provinces end with despair. We cannot hold the walls. Send help. But help never came. Around 1200 BCE, Hattusa was destroyed. Its houses and temples burned, its clay tablets baked by fire, its mighty walls collapsed into dust. The empire that had rivaled Egypt vanished almost overnight. A few Hittite cities survived in the south. In Carchemish, Melid, and other parts of Syria rose the Neo-Hittite kingdoms, small, proud echoes of the fallen empire. They still spoke the Hittite language, worshipped the old gods, and built basalt fortresses inscribed in cuneiform. But their world was already fading. Soon, even these remnants were conquered by the rising power of Assyria, and the memory of the Hittites was swallowed by time. For millennia, their name disappeared. The Bible mentioned mysterious Hittites, yet no one knew who they truly were. The world forgot the people who had written the first international treaties, codified laws, and left thousands of prayers to their gods. Only in the 19th century, when archaeologists uncovered the ruins of Bogazkoy and the countless clay tablets buried beneath it, did humanity hear their voice again, a voice silent for 3,000 years. It became clear that the Hittites were no legend. They were real. A people who spoke the oldest Indo-European language, who built, wrote, fought, and thought with astonishing depth. Today, the wind still moves through the ruins of Hattusa. It whistles between the stones where kings and priests once walked. There are no golden walls, no processions, only silence. A silence that speaks louder than any chronicle. It reminds us that nothing lasts forever, yet what is built through words and belief can outlive stone itself. The Hittites are gone, but their spirit endures. In every law, every treaty, every act of trust between nations, their empire fell, but their words survived. And as long as we read their tablets, the Hittites still live. Rebirth from the dust. 3,000 years of silence. Centuries during which no one remembered the Hittites. Their cities lay buried beneath the earth, their gods forgotten, their language lost. But history does not die. It waits. It hides in the dust, patient, until someone is willing to listen again. In the mid-19th century, European travelers and archaeologists began exploring the highlands of Anatolia. They found strange rock carvings, processions of gods, cuneiform signs etched into stone, massive ruins of ancient walls. Yet no one knew who had made them. These scattered traces pointed to a civilization that seemed to exist beyond the known maps of the ancient world. In 1834, the French archaeologist Charles Texier reached the small village of Bogazkoy. There, among the hills, he discovered the remains of a colossal city, walls, gates, temples, and palaces. He understood at once this had once been the capital of a great forgotten kingdom. But its name remained a mystery. Nearly 50 years passed before the mystery began to unravel. In the early 20th century, the German archaeologist Hugo Winkler led a large-scale excavation at Bogazkoy. He unearthed thousands of clay tablets covered in cuneiform, the royal archives of a civilization that had flourished more than 3,000 years before. And as scholars began to study them, one phrase appeared again and again: the great king of the land of Hatty. Hatty, the very same name found in Egyptian and Assyrian records. At last, the lost empire had a name. The ruins of Bogazkoy were the capital of the Hittites, Hattusa. Yet one final mystery remained: their language. The tablets used cuneiform, but the words themselves were unknown. Then, in 1915, Czech scholar Bedřich Hrozný made a discovery that changed history. He proved that the Hittite language belonged to the Indo-European family, the same linguistic roots as Sanskrit, Greek, Latin, and most modern European tongues. With that revelation, the Hittites stepped out of the shadows and back into the story of humanity as one of its oldest and most influential peoples. Today, Hattusa is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Visitors walk the same stone roads once trodden by kings and priests, pass through the Lion Gate, and gaze upon the remains of temples and palaces. The wind sweeps over the hills, whispering a name that was silent for millennia: the Hittites. Modern technology continues to resurrect their world. 3D reconstructions rebuild their temples. Virtual archives preserve their tablets. Scholars translate new texts each year. Laws, myths, prayers. And with every word deciphered, the Hittites become more human, more familiar. They wrote about love, justice, duty, and peace between nations. Perhaps their greatest message lies not in their weapons or their monuments, but in a single enduring truth: power fades, but the word endures. 3,000 years ago, the Hittites believed that a covenant between gods and men kept the world from falling apart. Now, as their voices rise again from the dust, that covenant continues, between past and present, between memory and oblivion. The Hittites are gone, yet not lost. They live on in every law, every peace treaty, every act of understanding that seeks balance between strength and wisdom. From dust and silence they returned to remind us that history never truly dies. It waits, and when we choose to listen, it breathes again. When empires disappear, what remains is not power, but memory, not the sword, but the word, not the god, but the human being who left his mark upon the clay.